So I hope that made sense in connecting things together, okay? How much connected to just one verse, verse 16, when it says, a highway or path would be provided as it was? Well, you got Isaiah 30, you got Deuteronomy 5, you got Deuteronomy 10. And by the way, I'm not claiming anything here, but I know what? I'm not that smart. If I didn't have these verses in me, the Ruach couldn't have worked with them. But the Ruach was able to then say, hey, because I didn't do a word search to find those verses. Those verses came to me, and that's how it could work for you. Put it in there, let the Ruach bring things to remembrance. That's what the Ruach does, okay? Because right away my brain's going, oh, what about that verse that says this is the way to walk in it? Now, I will admit I had to look up where it was, but I knew the verse. I just didn't remember what chapter it was in. And then, of course, I knew there was the verse in Deuteronomy, and I had to find that where it talked about do not turn aside to the right or the left. When you see phrases that you know you've heard before, go find where they are. They're connected. They're connected.
How long has this knowledge, this understanding of who Ephraim is, has been around? I mean, has there always been people throughout history that have understood this, or is this something that is relatively newly discovered in the past few generations or something? I mean, how far back does this go?
Okay, so your question is actually more than one question built in. Obviously, it was prophesied and it was talked about, and the Jews understood that, the Israelites understood that because it was talked about. What I think you're really asking is all the New Testament connections referring to that same thing. Yeah. That's more new, okay? Because even the Jews in their prayers, in their daily prayers, there's a series of prayers that in it, one of the prayers is for the restoration of the two houses and for the return of the lost tribes. So that's actually in their prayers, okay? So I don't know if they actually say it about the restoration of the two houses as much as they're saying the return of the lost tribes. So that's in their prayers and has been in their liturgy since they came out of Babylon. Okay, so it's been part of their liturgy for a long time. So just understand that that's something they're very aware of. Now, as far as the understanding of the restoration of the two houses, connecting what Yeshua said and the apostles said to what was going on, I don't know other groups that have had it. The latest version of awareness of it started in the very late 90s, okay? So, there was a kind of a sparking of this in the 90s where there became a lot of people out there really focused on it. That's not to say there weren't people earlier than the 90s, but where it became sort of more widespread and being talked about really was through the 90s.
Is that here?
Late 90s into early 2000s.
Was that in the States?
It was in the States here. I don't know what was going on elsewhere in the world.
Okay.
But I mean, that's when I first heard of it too, was in 98, I think, right when I first got married. My brother-in-law gave me teaching he had heard that was talking about the two houses. So I mean, I first heard of it was 98, all right? So in the late fall of 98, because I got married in September, and it was sometime right after that I found out about this stuff. And it blew my mind because, I thought I knew the Bible pretty good, and I was like, okay, who inserted all this stuff in my Bible? Where did that come from? It wasn't here last time I read it. But of course it was, we just couldn't see it. But part of the problem is, again, if you don't have that good, super solid Tanakh understanding, because everybody's going into the prophets to try to figure out end-time events. Well, this is the biggest end-time event, the bringing back together of the two sticks. But that's not what they're interested in. They're trying to figure out when Yeshua is returning. That's what they want to read the prophets for. They don't want to read about this is actually the most important thing that's going on, the restoration of the two houses. So again, when people ask you if you believe in the two houses, you have to first ask them, well, what do you mean by that? Because they may mean all kinds of things you don't mean. What I mean has taken me 9 hours to explain. Last time it took me 4, but I'm doing a more in-depth job this time. And so I can't just explain it to somebody in 2 seconds either. What does it really mean that I believe about two houses? I believe right now the book says there are two. I also believe that it's not supposed to be that way forever, that the two are supposed to become one. Okay, there was my 9-second answer. How that all plays out, that's a whole nother detail.
You brought up the highway of the remnant, and you connected it to going to Sinai, Mount Sinai. Would you then go ahead and agree further that it would represent going to Sinai jurisdiction, and they learn the final stage of Torah observance?
Yeah, that would probably be in agreement to what I was saying. I mean, that's the whole point, is that the highway was supposed to be as it was for Israel in the day that they came out of Egypt, out of Mitzrayim. Where did they go? They went to Sinai. Now, they did get trained along the way before they got there. Actually, they learned the first 4 commandments before they ever got there. But when they got there is when they got the much more full understanding, and then it continued as they were journeying eventually into the land. And they got further instruction.
Going to Sinai sounds like a pretty good thing then.
So going to Sinai, at least metaphorically, it's a metaphor for this, is a very good thing. Going literally to Sinai, I think you'd probably get shot because they have it pretty well protected at the moment. But yes, okay? But remember, it says that there is a prophecy, and we talked about it, where it says, and the law will go forth from Zion, and the word of Yahweh from Jerusalem. Okay, so now we're talking about Jerusalem, not Sinai. Because once he shifted all the attention to where the temple got built in Jerusalem, Sinai was no longer the place of focus. All right? So the place of focus has shifted. So now I would rather say, do you maybe want to end up in Jerusalem someday? Absolutely. Because after all, it's not Sinai that's coming down from heaven in Revelation 21, it's Jerusalem. The new Jerusalem's coming, not the new Sinai.
So I see here, Yehuda, part of the rejection, there's a shadow here perhaps of it having to do with who is Yeshua. I'm not ready to accept that, of a Yeshua, the fatted calf. I don't want to enter and partake and eat that fatted calf. And, that might be actually a subconscious part of the jealousy.
Okay, I just don't see that there's in the verses that Judah's rejecting being part of the fatted calf. He misses the party a little bit. And then he's saying, look, you didn't even give me a goat, so it's not like he doesn't want the fatted calf. I think the fatted calf is more a reference to, think about what's the verse that maybe pops right to your head about someone getting a fatted calf? We already talked about it today. In Genesis, where Abram goes and tells his wife to go get the fatted calf. When he wants to. So this all starts with Abram and Yahweh and a fatted calf. And this parable is actually the reverse. Now the father's getting the fatted calf for the returning son. So you see actually a full circle. I wish I had said that during the teaching. Thank you for bringing. Well, it'll be on the Afterburn. Okay? So I can see that this is coming full circle because in Genesis 8, I believe it is. No, Genesis 12. That's what we see. In Bereshit 12, Let me make sure I'm giving you the right chapter here. Is it 18? 18. Okay, 18. Okay, in Genesis 18, he says, look, he says to Abraham ran to the herd and he took it. And so Abraham goes and gets the good calf and gave it to a young man and said, prepare it. So here, Abram is doing it for Yahweh who showed up with some messengers. And then in the parable of the prodigal son, it's now come full circle. Okay, so I can actually see that even more. And I wouldn't have seen it had you not brought it up. So as you're bringing it up, my brain's going, well, that's probably not it, but wait, this is other thing. Okay? And so Judah is not appreciating that whole thing about hospitality, that this is all the legacy of Abraham, or Abram, the legacy of hospitality and appreciating and celebrating those that should be appreciated and celebrated. And so, he may have been one that, some of us are like, oh, yeah, we got a visitor. Okay, go get whatever, not the best and the most expensive and really, it's just a stranger coming to visit. Oh, he was my rotten, lousy brother who went out there and did whatever. Why are you all making a big party for him? See, Judah has a certain blindness. Remember, it says blindness in part has come on both houses. Okay, I think we probably read that. If we haven't, we're going to definitely read it before we finish. As part of the opening, of this teaching, where it talks about blindness in part has come upon both. And so they're not seeing it. But I actually like this whole idea of the full circle there from Abram, which is the promises, to now here the father's actually doing it the other way around for returning children of Abraham. Okay, so Randy, without passing the microphone over to him, he asked, is it a Shavuot-related event? I don't know that there's enough in that parable to connect it to Shavuot. It could be when I go back and read Luke 15 and see what was going on at the time, that it may have been around the time of Shavuot, and so maybe there's a connection there. But I don't see enough hints in there to tell me that it's connected to any of the feasts necessarily. So in the sort of the plan of salvation that Yahweh has, that he shows us through the feasts, would this returning son be a part of the Shavuot sort of returning in harvest, I'd have to think about it. I'm not sure where that might fit in. I really never thought about where the prodigal son may fit into the plan of the feast. But it's a good question.
The term remnant is used quite a bit in Isaiah. Who exactly is remnant? Is it Ephraim or Judah, or does it speak of those drawn by the Ruach?
Okay, so the remnant, this is really important, in literal sense is a small piece of a cloth. Okay? So in other words, it's something that is left from the original cloth. So we're talking about those that are not, the remnant of those that are part of the body or part of the cloth that have held through while others have fallen away or been torn away. So there's always a small group that are sticking it through when others have not stuck it through. So it's not Gentile, Judah, Ephraim, genealogy related. It's those who are part of the covenant, who have stuck through the covenant, and they can be pointed to as the visible body of Messiah, body of Elohim, children of Elohim, whatever word you want to use. So it's that small group that are still walking it through. In the story of the prodigal son, Judah would be the remnant. He was the one who stayed with it. He was there. He hadn't gone anywhere. He stuck it through where the others left. Okay, so at some point when there's this returning of the remnant, it says, look, and there shall be a highway, a path for the remnant. It'll be those of his people that have remained, remnant or remain, that's where you get the word remain from. That piece that remains after you've cut away the rest of, or used the rest of the cloth, the remaining piece. And so really, if you want to know if you're of the remnant, are you clinging and cleaving and staying to your Elohim? Simple as that. Don't try to figure out, is it the 144,000 or is it, how many of this tribe or that tribe, or whether it's of the Gentiles or Jews or the two houses, is it Ephraim or Judah? Stop all that. Walk this out no matter what happens and you're in the remnant. Because you will be the one remaining. By the way, why would the remnant be left with the left behind and taken away? No, the remnant is left behind. They're not taken away. That's what we read from Proverbs, the last part of chapter 2, one of the teachings, where it said that the wrong ones are taken away and the righteous dwell on the earth. Remnant are those that remained with. Remained, that was a remaining piece. So you want to make sure that you're counted among those that remained with Yahweh. And that would be the remnant.
What law is it that Yeshua was crucified for? Why the Christians say he is crucified by law? If it is not that, then what was his purpose?
Okay, that is a very complicated question. It's not easy to answer. But excuse me, he did not, what he did was not according to Levitical law. It wasn't to fulfill any one specific thing from Levitical law, so he did not do away with any Levitical sacrifices. And you will read in Acts that the apostles still did all the same offerings and sacrifices with all the rest of the Jewish community until there was no more temple. What you do have, though, is you've got things that have to do with the marriage laws and things that have to do with his making the tameh and tahor things so that they could be coming back and restored back as part of the body, that had to do more with the red heifer, as Shira mentioned, than had to do with any other thing. It had to do with the cleansing and purification. So there's going to be those linkages, but it's very complicated to explain how that all plays together.
Would you consider Isaiah 11:11 to be at the end of the 1,000-year reign?
Yeah, I would consider that to be when Yeshua returns. I'm not going to say it's going to be all the way at the end of the millennium, but I think that that's actually, all of this is happening during the millennium or right after Yeshua returns. And so this whole, the wolf and the lamb and the leopard and the young goat and all that stuff, this is all millennial language. So I wouldn't say that it was happening at the end, but it's going to be happening during.
Connie wants to know, I still do not quite understand exactly how Yeshua took away the enmity by dying and resurrecting.
Because when he came and did these things, he knew that this would be a way to bring people to the truth from all of the different places. He knew that Peter was going to start talking to Gentiles. He knew that Paul was going to start talking to Gentiles. And that as the word was going to be scattered and gone out, remember, after he came, when you read Matthew 28, isn't Matthew 28 after the resurrection? And Matthew 28, isn't that when he sends his disciples out to go and make disciples of the nations and spread the good news? to go out and make the restoration, to tell them the restoration has begun. Because part of the restoration was about letting the lost Israelites know it's okay to come home now. Okay? In other words, this is like the Father running to meet them. They're in their scattered places seeking the Father, and they're starting to come to the truth. They're hearing His voice where they are, and this is the word coming out saying, and your Father's running towards you. Come. And so that's the way I would see that.
If a pertinent and or timely scripture comes to your memory, is it safe to say it was Ruach inspired?
After the fact. In other words, after you see what that verse leads to. Because I've got a lot of people saying, oh, Abba gave me a verse. You know what? I don't get Abba gave me a verses in my life. And if I do, I don't think of it that way. Verses will come to my mind and I'll then make a decision or choice because I'm in the middle of doing something that may be a thought of a verse, and so then maybe that's the Ruach. When I say it in terms of the teaching is that I'm trying to put a teaching together, and these verses enhance the idea of one verse by connecting other verses. That I can say, okay, I can believe the Ruach is connecting the dots for me, because otherwise I wouldn't have had that verse knowing, hey, that other verse connects. But just in everyday life, when people say, oh, God gave me a verse, and I'm standing on that verse, I've got a lot of people who have said that and the fruit wasn't there. And so it's looking on, with 20/20 hindsight that we could really know. So I'm sitting here reading this teaching to you. I've seen how it went through as I delivered it, and I know that I had not had that in the original teaching until last night. This is all typical Friday night editions. When I take the teaching, I review it one last time, and I allow for the Ruach to say, hey, what about this little sidetrack here? What about connecting this dot? So that I believe is the Ruach doing that, okay? Because I didn't have that in my original notes or original thing. But just be careful. That's not the same thing of saying, well, that somehow a verse came to your head and now you're standing on that verse because it's why you're going to get married or not get married or get divorced or not get divorced or buy a car or not get a car or move or not move or change job. That's what people do. They'll grab a hold of a verse. Well, look, the other voices in your head could put verses in your head too. And so you got to look at the end result and the fruit of it at the end. So if you were given a verse, let's see how it plays out before we decide it was the Ruach or not. Is that fair? Okay, I can see that these verses synergize and work in helping to communicate the message better. So the fruit is there. That still doesn't mean it was the Ruach, but at least it certainly could be because the fruit is there. But again, wait till you see the results, and if the fruit is there, then it was likely the Ruach. Does that make sense? Okay, you're just not going to know until you see the end-to-end result in the fruit, because you got too many other voices in your head vying for attention, claiming and pretending to be the Ruach. And it's very easy for you to be fooled by either one of those other two voices, Hasatan or yourself. Very easy. Okay? So if I thought this was the Ruach and I threw it out there and it completely bombed and it didn't work and it didn't connect, well, then it probably wasn't the Ruach. But when it does synergize beautifully and goes right together, most likely it was.
All right, David is asking, I'm noticing that Judah is described as retaining the rest of the inheritance. Does this mean that Ephraim's firstborn status revoked in favor of Judah now?
No, it's just that he said that Judah, everything that you were supposed to have, you had. Judah's, you've been with me always. All this mine has been yours. I mean, it's always been that way because when it comes to the father, now let's make sure we're understanding this. When it comes to the father, we don't have that separation of the firstborn inheritance like in the physical world. In the physical world, the oldest brother was going to get everything and everybody else was getting crumbs. In the father's world, all of the children are going to get everything. And so he said, Judah, you stayed with me, so you got everything. And now your brother comes back and he gets everything because I've got a lot of everything. I got enough everything for everybody. Does that make any sense? So here it's no longer about hierarchy. This goes back to the brothers all fighting with Yeshua about, in front of Yeshua about who's the greatest in the kingdom. Who's going to be the greatest? Oh, and Yeshua's like, no, it doesn't work that way. There's plenty for everybody. So this is not dealing with the physical world anymore. This is like, hey, Judah, you are with me always, and all that's mine is yours. Guess what? And all that's mine is your brother's too, because I got a lot of stuff. I got enough for everybody, and then excess on top of that. So everything that you possibly need, I've already got for you. Why are you whining and complaining? which is why the parable of the guy getting paid makes sense too. Look, if I'm going to give you everything you possibly need, and you worked all day, and somebody else comes in at the end of the day, and I'm going to give them everything they possibly need, what difference does it make to you? You're still going to get everything you need. You agreed to work for what you were going to receive. And you're receiving what you wanted. I mean, that's what you wanted. You wanted to get paid what you got paid. So don't be jealous. This is, again, the same thing as the parable of the prodigal son. You see the same thing, the jealousy, the envy. Well, that's not fair. It's his way. We don't judge fair the way we think we should judge fair. Filtering it through your own brain is a bad way to judge fair. He says we don't know how to do that. But it said in Isaiah 11, the one that's coming, he knows how to judge fairly. He judged righteously with right rulings, with equity. That's the beginning. That was right there in verse 3 and 4 of Isaiah 11.
The other question I had is, you're talking about the highway in verse 16, chapter 11 of Isaiah. Mm-hmm. Those left from Ashur, would that be the exiles from Assyria, that is a reference to Ephraim?
Probably.
Okay.
Probably.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm not the world's best expert on all the references to the different nations or different parts of the world and how they fit into prophecy. That's why I wanted to focus on the highway part of the remnant. But it says those left from Asher, as it was for Israel in the day when they came up from the land of Egypt. So it's showing how that all plays through, connecting Egypt and the highway. When it starts talking about verse 14 and what that all means picture-wise, like I said, 15 and 14 and 15, that's why I skipped over that. That's outside of my normal range of focus, okay? Because understanding 14 and 15 is not going to change or help you walk this out better. Understanding 16 will, and understanding 13 will, okay? 15 and 14 are just going to happen because of what's going on in the other verses. Okay, but you don't need to know what to do. It's just that's describing what will actually happen. But the part that is important to you has to do with the no longer envying, no longer troubling, and the fact that there will be a highway. See, and Abba always has me focused on that which will affect what you do, so that you can do what's right in His eyes and what's pleasing in His sight, and get to hear the good words of being a well done, you good and trustworthy servant, etc.